Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here with Shinobi Yaki. He's got a great channel. I put a link to his channel in the description. I suggest if you're not subscribed to go subscribe. Probably most of the people interested in my channel have already subscribed to him. So he does science oriented videos. He knows a lot about evolution, natural selection, all that good stuff. Also, you've done quite a few videos on the trans stuff too, right?
Yes, I've done a few. I've done a series, 3 videos on sex education for SJWs,
So
which was
so
a tongue-in-cheek title, but it does actually go through the how the sexes are determined, and the final video actually goes into the transgender issue
yeah,
from a
so
genetic point
he's
of
got
view.
a great channel. I suggest you go check out his videos if you haven't already. So I am of the opinion that religion has evolved through an evolutionary process. I continually tweet about this, and one of my detractors is Shinobi, and I trust Shinobi's opinion. I have the utmost respect for him as a YouTuber and as a science enthusiast. I don't know if you're, for all I know, you're a science professor. Like you may have me way outranked in the real world here.
Yeah, the problem is there. Most of the time, I'm running off reservation, so
What does
I'm
that
not a
mean?
biologist by
Uh,
profession.
so you are a biologist?
No, I'm not a biologist.
Oh,
No.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So we I continually tweet stuff and you generally disagree with that stuff. So I thought it'd be good to have a live stream and we could talk about some of our disagreements. Before we started the stream, you had asked me a question about Richard Dawkins. Do you want to go ahead and ask that again and I can elaborate?
Yeah, sure. I was curious that is your position relating to Dawkins et al. Um, is it purely for effect, or is that what you actually have come to believe?
I do believe that Dawkins is incorrect with this selfish gene theory, and just for people who don't know, the selfish gene idea is that we can quantitate all of evolution at the genetic level. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, he is actually tied to that particular worldview. I also think he's correct in that. So we might disagree on that.
Yeah, so we disagree that I believe in multi-level selection. I believe that selection takes place at the level of the gene, as Dawkins has stated. And I also believe that evolution takes place at the level of culture. They call it gene culture coevolution. So, and I realize that that is kind of swimming against the stream at this point, but I do think the tide is turning more like Brett Weinstein is in the public light now, and he, I believe, believes in multi-level selection. So does David Sloan Wilson. You had mentioned before we started the stream about 2012 and how there was a dust up between E.O. Wilson and Richard
Dawkins,
Dawkins.
yeah.
Yeah.
I looked into it then, so I'm going back a few years. They did have quite how can we describe it? A disagreement.
Very.
That
There
would be
was
the polite
actually
way of putting it.
there was
Uh,
actually a post on Richard Dawkins' website, the Richard Dawkins Foundation website. And I wish I had screenshotted it because there was some words flying between Richard Dawkins and Jonathan Haidt. And I
it,
was,
it got quite for academics. It got quite spicy.
it got really spicy. Yeah. And it was right after Haidt had come out with his book in 2012, and Haidt in The Righteous Mind just lights up the four horsemen.
Yeah, the problem with that, the righteous mind. The problem I have with Height is I know he's your hero, but
Well, I believe in his research. I'm not tied to the man in any way, shape, or form, but I do think Moral Foundations theory has a lot of merit
you
to
are
it.
aware he's funded by the Templeton Foundation, aren't you?
No, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, he's had 2 grants, and actually the book publication was sponsored by Templeton.
And what is wrong with Templeton Foundation?
Well, I mean, nothing is fine,
They're
but
a
there is
conservative think tank, right?
Yeah, but the organization itself is biased towards a certain worldview. And I'm not suggesting that would taint his research.
I don't believe it would, and I've interacted with him on a personal level enough that I think like he's rock solid.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Rock solid about money, and I mean he's very like he's an academic through and through. Like he cares about the research more than he cares about the money. So
yeah, the problem with group selection theory, and I think a lot of your worldview depends on it being right, is that it's not widely held outside a particular small coterie of enthusiasts.
So let's get into group selection a bit, because I've been thinking about this for a long time. And I just want to lay out basically my thinking on it so you can have a go at it.
Yeah,
so
great.
There is gene selection, which there's no disagreement between us that genes are driving the ship. Genes create organisms, and those organisms are adaptive to certain environments, correct?
Okay, right.
Gene survival is dependent upon how adaptive that is to the environment, correct?
Yeah.
And with human beings, a lot of the environment is the social environment. So those genes are adapting to a certain environment that has a lot to do with forming groups and competing against other groups.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when those groups form, they form with a certain culture that will give them a advantage or disadvantage against other groups. And
so,
what's that?
How are you defining culture?
Well, if you want to simplify it down to like sports, so in any particular game of sports, take basketball for instance, there is a certain way of interacting among the team and interacting with other teams that you could call, for simplicity's sake, a culture. And the teams are really competing against each other on that culture because they have to be able to work together with what they have. Like even if you have great players and they don't function as a team, they're a team that has a better culture, a better form of cooperating could theoretically beat other teams that have better players if they're just bad cooperators, correct?
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's the thing is with that, the definition of culture, the definition that I normally use is that culture is learned behavior. That is anything that's not innate to the organism, anything that's acquired after it is culture.
Now I would say where the individuals are competing at the genetic level is their ability to adapt and implement culture.
Yeah, the problem with that is that the genes will be selecting for biological structure, whereas culture is behavioral. You have a problem. How would a gene select for behavioral? You could select for capacity.
You don't think? I mean, genes do select for behavior. I mean, there's behaviors in animals. You're not saying that.
Yeah, but
I mean, beavers build dams. It's
not
genetic.
selecting for specific behaviors. It's selecting for particular preferences, particular biases in behavior. It's not actually selecting for specific behaviors. It's the capacity to behave in a particular way that's being selected for. So for instance, and the other problem we have then with group selection is how would the genes be selecting for group preferences? How would individual genes situated in an individual be selecting for behaviors which are group-based?
Well, they would be selecting for behaviors that would help them interact with a group. So antisocial behaviors that made people bad cooperators would be less likely to be embedded in a group, and their survival would be at stake if they weren't embedded in a group.
Yeah, this is another main issue with group selection is the fact that you have if you're maintaining that how would the group selection be selecting for that particular behavior?
Well, do you understand that at the level of culture, like in the NBA, if we go back to the basketball example, in the NBA is an institution that is selecting culture at some level, because the basketball teams that rise to the top of the NBA are going to have a better culture. They have better players as well. I mean, that's part of it. So that's why a biologist would say, or a sociologist or an anthropologist would say, it's gene culture coevolution, because not only is it the individual constituents, and I mean they find this all the time, like at the level of the organism, they find, okay, this guy has some crazy gene that makes him grow huge muscles, right? That's a component that increases the fitness at the organism level. But still there's another level above that. Like that guy becomes a better player for a team. Like if he has stronger muscles and he's a better player that way, but he's a horrible cooperator and he can't become a part of a team, then there's pluses and minuses. But this is why multi-level selection is a thing, because they say, like, we evolved as a tribal species. And group selection doesn't have to be taking place all throughout the history of humankind, all throughout of our evolutionary history. I mean, it could have taken place just height narrows it down to 10,000 years. If there was a catastrophe that tribes were competing against other tribes, they would be competing the same exact way as the basketball players are competing in the NBA. They'd be competing on culture. And the tribe that had the best culture, the most cooperative culture, I mean, obviously there are other factors at play here, but we'll just narrow it down to the one. Theoretically, that tribe would have a better survival advantage than the other tribe. And when we're talking about the tribe level, we're talking about the whole tribe being wiped out, all of their genes.
Yeah, but how is that selected for genetically? To think, right, if we take the I think my favorite example is writing. Writing is based on language, the ability to acquire language.
Mm-hmm.
These are identifiable structures within the brain responsible for language acquisition and processing. Yep. Right? We can identify these structures in the brain, and we can also identify the genes associated with these structures within the brain. Writing is not genetic. There's no writing gene in the human genome.
Yeah.
It relies on the language acquisition side of things. Yeah. So it's actually using an evolved mechanism, a cognitive mechanism that has evolved for communication. And as a byproduct, we can use that to develop writing skills. Now, writing skill, I would regard as a cultural issue. It's a learned behavior. You learn how to write. You learn how to perform mathematics. Now, mathematics is related to spatial ability. Spatial ability is an evolved trait.
Right.
You can identify the genes associated with that trait. You can't identify the genes associated with mathematical ability, although there will obviously be genes that affect mathematical ability. But they will be affecting different parts of the cognitive process, the connectome between the two hemispheres, or the capacity to hold numbers, for instance. These might be affected by different genes in the genome, but there is no mathematical gene as such. It relies on the spatial ability, which is the evolved trait. The mathematical abilities is the byproduct, and the writing ability is a byproduct of the evolved cognitive mechanism. So you see what I mean? There's a difference between an evolved trait or a cognitive mechanism, which we can identify the genes, and we can imagine how these traits are selected for in the environment and what purpose they serve in the environment. We can also identify the traits and behaviors that are associated with these evolved mechanisms, but they're not part of that mechanism. They're a byproduct. a useful byproduct, but a byproduct nonetheless.
What is when does a byproduct start becoming an adaptation and start being selected for, though? Because that is a possibility.
Yeah,
obviously.
this is the interesting thing. There's two worldviews that's in operation here. You're taking the adaptive worldview, and what the adaptive worldview is that it says that, right, we've evolved this propensity for religion as an adaptive trait. So therefore, there must be something about this belief in God that serve the evolutionary process, to serve our survival or help and improve our chances of survival in the environment. So therefore, the God module has developed, and it's an adaptive trait. It's a useful trait. It's an evolutionary trait. It's helpful to us in our long-term survival.
Yes.
The other worldview is the view that, well, actually, yes, the propensity for superstition and religious belief is an evolved trait, but it's a byproduct of cognitive mechanisms. It's not directly evolved to serve a function. It utilizes cognitive mechanisms that do serve a function, and the superstition is a byproduct of those particular mechanisms.
But how long before that byproduct becomes an adaptation?
Well, sometimes none. If you think about culture, you will never include that in a gene. Why would you want to include culture in the genome? It's a learned behavior.
You could argue that beavers creating dams is a culture that's included in the genome. I mean, there could be examples where it's useful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example, isn't it? Or we could use a troop of monkeys. Now, monkeys have culture, identifiable culture. I think they have more cultures than human beings do.
I mean, the advantage that humans have is that the culture is flexible. So then, if you go back to the NBA team example, the basketball players could have a shitty season and adapt a new culture that could. I mean, I would argue that's probably what they do at the end of their season.
Yeah, that's right. Like, for instance, you'd have a group of monkeys, for instance, they develop a particular tool for getting termites out of a termite hill or whatever. This is passed on culturally. One monkey will discover a method of extracting the termites, and the other monkeys will copy it. Now, copying is also a cultural adaptation.
Well, there's Joseph Hendrick has done some studies that show that it's actually, that is, in human beings, that's part of our genes, the copying thing.
Yeah, it's very important, isn't it? It's how you would acquire culture. Now,
it is.
The question is, when chimpanzees learn how to use different tools, and the tools vary between chimpanzee troop to troop. Some will use sticks, some will have acquired use of stones to smash shells or whatever, or nuts. So each monkey troop will have a slightly different culture, and they were using different tools. But these cultural artifacts are learned behaviors.
But that doesn't make any difference on the theory that I laid out, because if the genes are selecting for acquiring and implementing good behavioral strategies, and those good behavioral strategies involve operating in cooperative groups, then both levels of evolution could easily be taking place. I mean, there's a cultural level and there's a genetic level.
Yeah, well, I think we both agree that what I'm suggesting is that we've got two slightly different worldviews. That your worldview is that these are adaptive traits, and I'm suggesting that, well, no, they're not adaptive. They're a byproduct.
Right, and let's go back to
your view and my view maintain that these traits aren't an evolved trait, but the mechanism is slightly different in both examples, aren't they?
I have a couple of super chats I'll read, and then I want to go back to the religion thing. I have a
Yeah,
couple
right.
questions for you. New Renaissance for 25 PLN says, check out Cohen and Stewart's notion of excellence. Religion as part of culture must emerge because we don't have genetic memory. Yeah, that's kind of my position as well. Popog for $5 says, groups that don't have the desired behaviors get outcompeted by groups that do. That's the selection pressure. Yeah, and I brought this up too with you on the. I mean, there's all kinds of examples in human culture. There's the sports teams. There's corporations, which are groups that compete on culture. There's a lot of different levels of this selection pressure going on. But I want to ask you, Shinobi, like, what is your feeling about religion? What is your take on religion?
Well, obviously, I'm an atheist, but I'm of the European species. So sometimes I find it difficult to relate to some of the politics involved on the American side of things, because my family has never been religious. I was never brought up with religion, so it's an alien. Yeah, I've never had to survive. The interesting thing is the difference between the UK and Southern Ireland, for instance. Now, in Southern Ireland, they have an atheists association or an atheists movement, but that's in reaction to the fact that for a long time, Southern Ireland was ruled. It was a Catholic state. It wasn't a theology, but or a theocratic state. But there was a lot of the Catholic ideology enshrined in law. And therefore, atheists would have a bit of a difficult time in Ireland, as you can imagine.
So the rebellion took place.
Yeah, so therefore they've got their atheist association or atheist group or movement or what have you. And it's the same in the States, isn't it? I mean, the odd thing about it is that the UK is, it has actually an official religion. It's the Church of England. So we have a state religion, but it's never maintained. It's never enforced on the population. So people have gradually drifted towards non-belief rather than belief. But in the US, where you have no state religion, because of the Constitution, it's more religious than the country that has a state religion. And I always find that a bit paradoxical, isn't it? The US has no mandated religion, and yet it's a religious country. And the UK does have a designated religion, and it's more atheistic. It's very strange.
It's probably just a Streisand effect. It's just whenever you tell people, like over there, they say, "Yeah, you have to be Catholic," so they're like, "No, I don't want to be." And over here, they're like, "Separation of church and state," so they're like, "We want religion."
I always remember my mother was because I was born in the valleys, and in my parents' time, the main religion there would have been the Baptist churches, and they would have been very fire and brimstone. Do you ever see the film How Green Was My Valley?
I haven't, but
yeah,
that fire and brimstone stuff I kind of like.
Yeah, well, they would have preached fire and brimstone from the pulpit, and of course, in those days, the younger generation rebelled against this quite intolerant strain of religion, and the result was that the Baptist churches emptied over time.
Yeah, I think if the religious system is a voluntary system, I think you get good outcomes on competing on culture, because none of the religions can get too terribly nasty. It's when it's some sort of involuntary system where you're forcing people into groups that they don't necessarily want to be a part of, that you can get really toxic stuff going on. So I think that's a component to keep track of.
Yeah. So anyway, the point I was making was the fact that because I've got a slightly different life experience to people in the US, then my atheism is slightly different. Is I don't consider myself part of a group. I don't associate myself as being a member of atheism. I am an atheist, and that's just my take on a particular philosophical point of view. But I can quite imagine if you're in a country whereby atheism is more difficult to maintain, that you would have to form political affiliations and associate with like-minded people by necessity, which is why you have the Atheist Association of Southern Ireland and why you would have atheist groups in the US. And I can see why that might occur. But in the UK, you don't have an equivalent need to form those types of associations. So what you find is in the UK, atheists tend to be a bit more individualistic, and they don't really regard themselves as part of a larger organization or a larger group. I think that was the point I was making there.
So I do notice, though, when I've been interacting with you on Twitter, you say that atheism isn't really an integral part of your philosophy, but I do notice that your thinking on this topic is very much, it feels very much like a product of seeing religion as a failed science, which is a classic Dawkins, Sam Harris point of view.
Yeah,
and
Wilson,
I don't
I've
see
actually
religion
seen
that
the downside of religion, and it is not very attractive. And not many people, I mean, in Northern Ireland, for instance, you've had people wanting to rip each other's children apart, literally.
right.
And that is when you see that grown adults wanting to attack toddlers, basically, because they belong to because they believe in transubstantiation, some other nonsense.
Okay, well, I will agree with you 100% there. Like,
and the other thing is, of course, I think that a lot of people, when 9/11 happened, a lot of people who were quite quiet atheists, they were atheists, but they didn't really think about it too much. When they seen that happen, I think myself and other people realized, well, hang on a minute, this type of thinking can have serious consequences. And I think Dawkins have said that's when he sort of thought, well, hang on, you've got to do something about this. You can't leave it unchallenged, this worldview, because it can lead to complete and utter disaster. And I think Hitchens said that his one fear was when an apocalyptic religion got their hands on an atomic weapon, then we really need to worry about it. Yeah, and it might be too late at that point. So
it's funny, I see so many parallels between this and the gun debate too, because the argument is virtually the same. People would say that you're attacking religion is just attacking the tool that unites people, and that really it's the people that you should be attacking. Like 9/11 wasn't a product of religion. 9/11 was a product of those people wanting to attack us for whatever reason, and religion is what bound them.
It was definitely a product of religion.
Religion made it possible for them to organize.
Not only that, it was only religion that could have enabled that action to take place.
Why, if it was generated by Islam, though, why didn't we just blanket attack on Islam? Why did Christianity get taken up in the fight?
Well, I think we got in the West, we misunderstand the nature of Islam, because we're used to religions being fluffy. I mean, we pulled the teeth and claws of our religions during the Reformation and the Enlightenment. So yeah, we've lost the innate ability to put ourselves in the religious zealot's mind. We don't understand the basic psychology of the religious fundamentalist. And people in the West assume that Islam is the same as Christianity, is the same as, it's just a more elaborate form of Catholicism, for instance. But they don't understand that the religion itself is fundamentally different, is totalitarian. Islam dictates every aspect of life.
Does every religion have to be totalitarian, though?
Well, Christianity is not totalitarian as far as I can see. It can be. I mean, the Catholic faith was quite totalitarian for many centuries, but Christianity has gone through a Reformation, and Western Europe has gone through the Enlightenment. So it can no longer pose that particular threat. But Islam has never had a Reformation. There is no Enlightenment in Islamic countries. And therefore, you have a raw form of religious zeal.
The distinction I'm usually pointing out is between honor cultures and dignity cultures. And honor cultures are definitely more violent. And I would say that we got attacked on 9/11 by an honor culture, which is something completely different.
That's a good way of putting it. Actually, I listened to a Swedish psychologist who had done interviews with Islamists, and that's exactly the point he made: the difference between the honor culture and the respect culture.
Yeah, you can, in all of Osama bin Laden's speeches and writings, you can reeks of honor. America's disrespected them. So I mean, if you look at it that way, then I don't see why the goal isn't eliminating honor culture, why we're going after, which Christianity seems like a good facilitator of a dignity culture, which if we agree dignity culture is the thing that we want, I think we're right now, dignity culture is being supplanted by victimhood culture. Haidt and I can't remember the name of the other author have written about this at length. So I want to go back to the thing because we never really touched on the reason I brought it up, the religion as a failed science. That's just such a vastly different way of looking at religion than I'm looking at religion, that I think a lot of our miscommunication is a product of that. Because evolution, if you look at religion from an evolutionary perspective, religion didn't evolve to give us, it didn't evolve as a science. It didn't evolve to give us answers about the natural world. It evolved to facilitate cooperation between groups. So if you're judging it as a failed science, you're judging it.
Jump in there, because in my mind, I've got two different sides of this issue. You have the evolutionary side, which would account for the propensity to superstition, for instance, or the God module, the belief in a deity or God.
Do you think that God module is genetic? That superstitious module?
No, it's just.
You don't think the superstitious module is genetic?
No, it's a byproduct of other cognitive mechanisms. But the point I was going to make is,
okay, we disagree there, but
yeah. Well, we can chat about that after. But the point I want to make is that the belief in a deity or gods is one thing, yeah, but religion itself is an entirely different thing. Yeah, it's a separate issue. It's like, you can think of it as you've got the God module, which is fundamental to the religious side of it, but religion is a highly complex and a more refined a trait, because when you look at religions, they're all highly complex, whereas the underlying superstition, the underlying belief system, so you've got two levels of belief.
Let's isolate it. Let's call it out. Dawkins calls it out. It's the hyperactive detection module, right? That has all the
agency. Yeah. That's one of the modules that would be responsible for superstitious beliefs, and you could say that might be responsible, for instance, for animism.
So but it detects agency where there is none, and it's prone to false positives, correct?
Yeah.
You don't think that's genetic?
Oh, that's genetic, yes.
Totally. Okay. So
the agency detection is genetic, and it would be on a positive trigger for obvious reasons.
And what is when that thing is hitting all the time, boom, 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 we feel like someone's watching us, boom, 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 all day long. Yeah. I feel like someone's watching me. What do you think that, like, that module is like? It's so easy to make the connection between who's watching me, who's watching you, Shinobi.
Yeah, well, the thing is, right, you've got this trait, this evolutionary trait, this mechanism,
right,
and it is domain specific. It's designed to perform a particular function.
Yeah, give us information when we need to run, right?
Well, exactly. What you need to do is to be able to identify a predator in the wild.
Yeah.
So therefore, if that bunch of grass over there starts to move in an odd way against the wind, for instance, that might be a predator. So instantly your agency detection is triggered. And it's triggered in a positive mode because it's better to run away from a non-predator than stay an extra 2 or 3 milliseconds and be lunch. Yeah,
exactly.
So it'll trigger on the positive side of the input.
And it's easy to make an evolutionary connection between those, because the people who had the hyperactive ones who ran away even when they didn't need to, they survived, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, the running away when there's nothing there is wasteful, isn't it?
It is to a certain point. But what my argument is, there's a point when that wasteful behavior became useful, because as soon as
it's the weighting that you attribute to that behavior, isn't it? It's better to run away more often than not.
Well, but as soon as we started getting embedded in social groups, and the predator that we were detecting falsely was God, and God was telling us that we had to be good to our neighbor and that we had to be, all these pro-social behaviors, then all of a sudden that thing that was...
It's not. The thing is, with the hyperagency detection, is that might account for animism, but I think one of the major cognitive mechanisms is theory of mind. Is when apes evolve theory of mind, then you start getting into the God territory, yeah? Because if people are not familiar, animism is just the attribute of agency to non-animated objects. For instance, what's making the grass shake or the leaves shake, yeah? And it might be something doing that. And you can imagine there's a little leap there between agency detection and animism, yeah? There are spirits in the forest, or
could we eliminate this agency detection module, or are we stuck with it?
No, we're stuck with it.
Okay, so if the agency detection is what's causing religion, I don't see how you can get rid of religion if you can't get rid of the module.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's right. We say that the cognitive mechanism is operating successfully if it only operates in that domain that it was evolved to serve. So, for instance, the agency detection module in your
that is a crazy way to look at it.
Yeah, but if you think about it, it's operating successfully if it only operates in that domain. If it's only detecting agents in the environment, then that is a successful cognitive product.
How do you square that with the evolution of like feathers, though, where feathers were obviously evolved as an insulation, and then flight became a secondary force for them? But obviously, once flight came into being, then feathers started evolving in ways that were more advantageous to flight. I mean, it's the same exact principle.
Well, that's a good example, isn't it?
I mean, so the agency detection device was evolved for helping us run away from predators, but now the evolutionary pressure that's taken over is facilitating pro-social behavior in groups, because groups...
But as far as your worldview is concerned, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem rests with my particular worldview, because when the function misfires or has a byproduct, which is my worldview, then we have to account for that. Not necessarily account for the adaptation side of it.
Well, I see a lot of the thinking. I guess it's obvious why it bugs me, but a lot of the thinking on the atheists, particularly the militant atheists. I'm an atheist myself, so it's difficult for me because I'm not a militant atheist. I'm not an anti-theist, but I see a lot on the anti-theist side, this idea that religion is a failed science, which it is a failed science because it never was meant to be a science. It's like saying that an airplane or a car is a failed airplane. Well, it was never meant to be an airplane. So I don't know why you'd say it was a failed airplane. It's serving a purpose.
I don't think, yeah, that's not a fair description of it. I think religion is, originally, you can trace the evolution of religious beliefs, and it starts off with animism, doesn't it? That's the most basic form.
The agency detection? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, when you look at the pagans, for instance, they were quite scientific. If you think about it, they were wrong, obviously, but I mean, what they would do is they realized, yeah, I mean, they realized the sun comes up in the...
Obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you make a circle of stones and you do X and Y, then you'll get the harvest next spring. Yeah.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, next spring, the harvest pops
Well, they
up.
got a 50-50 chance, you know. So.
Well, yeah, but I mean, 50-50 is better than nothing, isn't it? But you can understand how they would fall into these belief systems.
Totally.
If you do a ritual, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you get a good result at the end of it. Then, so that's fine. And that's quite scientific, isn't it? Because you've got cause there, and you're hoping to create an effect further down the road. So that's quite a rational way of doing things. It's wrong because it doesn't actually match reality, does it?
Yeah.
Right. It's not what's happening, but it's what they think is happening, and this is why they keep doing the ritual. So that paganism is quite scientific. I mean, you can understand that. That might be considered as a proto-science.
Though but if you look at it from my perspective, the pro-social aspects of doing the ritual could increase their chances of being better cooperators and making the harvest successful in that way.
Yeah, and I know exactly what Richard Dawkins would turn around and say. He'd say, "Well, that's fair enough, but all these group selection things can be explained by the individual adaptation theory, the normal theory of evolution, or kin selection."
You can't explain the cultural level that way, though.
Well, yeah, because there's a saying that there was a good phrase, and let's see if I can remember it. And I forget the name of the biologist who described it this way, but what he said was, a fleet herd of deer is the same as a herd of fleet deer.
Yes, I know that.
What I mean? You just
we're not talking about a herd, though. We're talking about something.
Yeah, but what you've done there, what you've done there is just instead of attributing the evolved traits to the individual within that herd, he's just applied it to the herd. He's saying that herd of deer is fleet, which it is. It will move as one, and it will be fleet of foot. But what's actually happening is that the individuals in that herd are fleet. They're the ones that evolved the trait to escape the predator. The fact that they're doing it as a herd is aside the point, isn't it?
But comparing a basketball team to a herd is
yeah, I don't think
completely
you actually play basketball. And the thing is, with the sport analogy, is it is mostly acquired skill, isn't it?
Well, and also it's cooperation skill. The herd isn't cooperating. A beehive is cooperating. A functioning military is cooperating at levels of cooperation that are amazing. Like you don't see that in nature.
Yeah, but you're assuming that cooperation is a group skill and not an individual skill.
But it's both. It's both because of the culture
the Dawkins would turn around and say, "Well, hang on a minute, right? You put it this way." Richard would look down his glasses at you and say, "Well, let's look at it this way."
I have a bunch of super chats I'm going to get to in a minute, just to let you guys know. But go ahead and finish your point, shall we?
Yeah, right. So he'd say something like this. He'd say, "Well, look, this it seems that way, yeah, that this is a group skill, but actually what's happening is the individual is acting purely out of self-interest. The fact is that the emergent behavior we perceive as group-based or a social skill
What happens when the guy jumps on the grenade?
Altruism. Well, that is actually one of the
Does the guy jump on the grenade when there's
if I was
nobody
going
around, or what?
If I was going to attack group selection, that would be the exact thing I'd come up with, because group selection can't explain altruism, because the individuals cycle out faster than the groups would evolve.
Well, and also, how do you study the cultural layer if you through Dawkins' method, you have to ignore the cultural layer, and those basketball teams have different cultures. Like, part of being on that basketball team is developing a culture that's adapted to the members. Like, you have a certain like complement of assets on a basketball team. You're developing a culture that's acclimated to those particular unique assets.
Yeah, but the thing is, we can't just assume that. Remember, I asked you about the zebras, why zebras were striped, and the zebras are camouflaged against the herd, not the environment.
No, I know this.
Yeah, when you look at the zebra, I mean, it's not a very effective camouflage, is it, on that terrain? But it camouflages that individual against the herd. So
I don't think it's fair using herd examples.
Well, the thing is that individual is hoping that the predator will take another member of the herd. He isn't sat there thinking, what can I do to increase the survival of the herd? He's increasing his own survival.
But herds aren't hives. Herds aren't hives.
Well,
bees and ants will sacrifice themselves for the hive.
Right, hives, insect behavior is social, so that's slightly different from herd behavior, isn't it?
Humans form hives.
No, humans are primates. They basically social animals, but they don't. The thing is, with insects, it's not really. You're going down the evolutionary track there.
Have humans sacrifice themselves from genetic strangers? Sacrifice themselves for genetic strangers?
Altruism
happens all the time.
Yeah, it does. It's difficult to explain, but
would you see that behavior in a herd? When was the last time a zebra marched out and said, "Oh, eat me today"?
Well, you very rarely see it in nature.
I know.
It very rarely. The thing is, it very rarely goes outside the kin. The kin group.
Cooperation beyond kinship is what.
Yeah, you'll have you'll have in primate groups the alpha male who will protect his own. Yeah.
Are you any good at? Can you see the super chats?
No, I never watch the super chat because it's distracting me. So
yeah, here, let me read some super chats. New Renaissance.
If the super chat is up, I'll read it and I'll get distracted.
I'm a terrible reader too. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to get better.
The thing is, and I've done it all when I listen to other people's streams, and I watch the super chat and I get involved in what's happening in the super chat. So
new Renaissance for 250 P&L says intelligence, individual discovering patterns in the world, intelligence, culture, language, rituals, belief structures, a way to store knowledge outside of the individual. Exactly. It is a vessel where we keep everything we can't store in the genes. Like, what is a hammer? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's decoupled cognition.
Two levels going on. The cultural level, and I just, from a scientific perspective, I don't see why you would ignore an entire level of culture. So the rightful king of Finland, what's up? We have royalty here again. I think it's £5. Says religions are generally totalitarian, but totalitarianism isn't in itself bad. Okay, we might disagree on that, but I admire you for taking the extreme position. Popog for $2 says, Shinobi, what's the test for byproduct versus evolved? So I'll let you answer that, and I think I have another super chat after that.
Byproduct evolved, right? the two modes of looking at this particular problem is that I think what he means is the adaptive mode. Yeah.
Well, I gave the feathers example just off the top of my head, but I think it's a good example.
You've got the adaptive mode, which means that a particular trait is useful for survival or for the individual, obviously, and then you've got the byproduct mode, which means that that particular trait, although it's based on an evolved trait, is not operating in the domain for which it was evolved for, basically. And I think the example that I gave was writing, isn't it?
Yeah, writing is a good one.
Yeah,
I actually read, there's something super interesting that I read recently about writing. So in writing, we confiscate neurons, brain neurons from the portion of the brain that we use as a face detector to detect letters. And they did some experiment where people who actually are voracious readers are worse at remembering faces because they've adapted more of their face detection software or hardware in their brain.
So are they using that cognitive mechanism, the face detection?
Yeah, they're using the face. They're using the face detector for detecting words and letters. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is that not fascinating?
Yeah, it is. That sounds quite reasonable, doesn't it?
So they did an experiment where they lined up a bunch of people who were heavy readers against people who weren't, and measured how good they were at face detection. And the people who were better readers, this might have been in Jordan Peterson's book, that's one of the books I've been reading recently. But
yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting, isn't it? Because
it's totally interesting.
Yeah, there's an example of an evolved trait, face detection, being used as a byproduct in another cognitive trait, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Wasn't evolved.
The Sal for $5 says the massive modularity hypothesis has a lot of problems. I should do it. Has a lot of problems. Please look into some of the research on it.
Is he referring to the computational theory of mind?
Sal's a woman, and I'm not sure. You at me in a chat, in a regular chat, Sal.
Yeah.
Oh, it's she has another one. Sal for $5. It's been mathematically shown that altruism can get a foothold in a selfish population, and then it will spread. Sal recommended a book to me. I can't remember the title of the book, but I read about half of it, and I had a lot of problems. It's difficult for me to tell if a lot of my problems were because of my bias, but that's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you. I mean, we all have bias. I think one of the cultures that we should be fostering is being able to have conversations like Shinobi and I are having right now.
Yeah, I think the problem is that everyone has a bias. I mean,
totally.
I mean, you've got to recognize that and work around it, which is why the scientific method is so effective, isn't it?
It is, but this is why one of my goals is to separate that thinking, because religion is not science. And Jordan Peterson, God bless his soul, or good bless his soul, says this all the time. Like religion is not a science. They are focused on completely different objectives.
Oh, Peterson.
Popog for $5 says an individual mutation isn't designed for a use. All traits are byproducts. And that exactly. All traits are really byproducts. It's random mutation. So
no, really, because
Sal, if you want to give me the name of that book, I'd love to let people know just so they can have a shot at reading it too.
Yeah, the thing is, once the trait has been passed on to the next individual, what I'm saying is that you have an evolved trait which is evolved for a particular domain. It means it's got a particular use in the environment, agency detection, for instance. That itself is not a byproduct. Well, it's a byproduct of the evolutionary process, but it's a valid adaptation. You can't say it's performing its function within that domain. So it's a perfectly adequate or perfectly valid adaptation. A byproduct would be when that adaptation is applied to a domain for which it was not evolved. For instance, the face recognition side of it being employed to identify characters on a page. That would be the byproduct, not the actual evolved trait itself.
Yeah.
I think that was the point I was making.
So obviously I've given you some stuff to think about. I think, do you better understand my position now? Does my position seem completely bonkers?
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
no.
it does. Or
the two worldviews are, I think we can both agree on the evolutionary process at a fundamental level. Yeah.
Do you think culture is evolving? Because like the idea of a corporation is,
yes, yeah, but that's not evolution.
So cultural evolution. What is it then? If we're
culture will develop, you would develop culture. Culture will become more complex as time.
You don't think culture?
No, culture is an accumulative process. It will increase that, for instance, the super chat said data storage, for instance, information storage would be critical in the development of technologies and high culture. And the more that you're able to do that, the more complex your culture can become. For instance, when you look at the evolution of religions, I had a diagram somewhere that there was a tree and it followed the evolution of different religions. And as time went on, the more complex each branch of the tree became, the nearer it got up to our time. And it was quite striking that you started off at the bottom with very simple, like animist and pagan religions. And as you progressed up through the time and the branches of the tree, the more complex became the religious structures themselves. So that the religion was developing as time goes on. Now, you could call that evolution, but I would say that was more a development issue rather than evolve, because there's no genes involved, there's no genetic units involved in that evolution.
So
there's no papacy gene, for instance.
Aren't you really constraining the concept of evolution, though, if you're forcing it into genes? And even if you were forcing it into genes,
well, genetics tends to be gene focused.
But even Dawkins himself, Dawkins coined the term meme as a unit of culture.
Yeah, I mean that's replication. That's the principles are very similar, aren't they? But when we talk about biology, we're talking about the genome. We're talking about genes. And you can only meaningfully talk about things that you can encode in the genome.
But in culture, we could talk about memes. And we do talk about memes.
Yeah, I mean, culture I think it's a separate issue, isn't it? Culture is a learned behavior. Everything that we learn, everything that's not innate in our nature is cultural.
And we have different storage methods. We don't store it in our biology, although this is one of the arguments Peterson has, is that we do store it in our biology.
No, the term I used was disembodied cognition. Now that's very important for development of cultural artifacts. And what I mean by this is, for instance, you have an innate mathematical skill, and it's based on spatial ability, which is an evolved trait. But the mathematical skill itself is a learned behavior. Yeah, it's not passed on via the genes. So you have to learn how to count and subtract and add up. Yeah, that's a cultural artifact. There comes a point where the capacity to store numbers exceeds or is less than the sum that you want to make. Right? If you've got two large numbers, you're going to write it down, aren't you?
Yes.
That is disembodied cognition. You're using the environment then to aid in the calculation.
Hey, pragmatic culture, I sent you an invite. Sorry to interrupt, Shinobi. I sent you an invite on Twitter. If you want to jump in, you can ask Shinobi yourself. But go ahead.
Yeah. So that disembodied cognition is critical in our everyday lives, actually, if you think about it. If you ever look at the picture of Feynman or Einstein, they're in front of a blackboard with all the equations on the blackboard. Now, that's a classic example of disembodied cognition. They're not doing the maths in their head, they're doing it on the blackboard. That blackboard is an aid to cognition. Yeah?
Yes.
So you see how it works? And the more sophisticated...
A cultural aid. It's a cultural component, though. But even even in the scientific method, we challenge those assumptions and hone them in the same evolutionary process. We're in the scientific domain, though, where the selection pressure is truth. We're looking for factual reality. Correct?
Yeah. But the thing is, the whole issue is it depends which side of the coin that you're looking at, isn't it?
Well, I think you should look at my side. That's why I'm here arguing for it.
Yeah, I'm looking at your side, right? Okay, fine. The main problem I have with that is it does rely on group selection theory. Okay,
so your big problem is that you don't think group selection theory is like that type of thinking is completely off the table for you.
No. I mean, group selection theory it's possible, but at the moment, the state of the science is that everything that group selection theory can possibly account for is already accounted for by the standard theory or kin selection. Yeah, but it's not bringing anything new to the table. Any behavior. I mean, if you were speaking to a biologist and you said, right, feathers, right, they would be able to give you the counter example off the top of their head, probably, and say, well, feathers were evolved for X, Y, and Z. Yeah, and it's not actually a group selection taking place. It's an individual selection. It's a fitness selection. Yeah, it optimizes the fitness of that individual for its survival. Yeah, it just so happens that birds have feathers and they flock and they act sometimes in a group, but that itself is not being selected for. It's the individual traits. So, for instance, if you look at flocking algorithms, any entity within a flock is only relating to one individual within that flock, and they've got simple rules that I'm following that individual. I'm not going to get too close, and I don't want to lose them. And then when you aggravate that behavior, you have a flock, basically.
No, I know how emergent properties work, but you keep saying flock, and I keep talking about hives.
Yeah, well, yeah, insects.
It's a very different. It's a very different animal.
It is.
All groups are not the same.
The thing is, a lot of the individuals in that hive will be sterile. They're not actually part of the selection process at all. So therefore, any sacrifices made by a drone or a worker is not really. It's not affecting the hive's survivability, is it?
Yeah, it's group selection at its finest. Pragmatic Culture for $5 says, can you ask Shinobi if he only believes in a physical reality? And if so, why he doesn't believe in moral, ethical realities? Well, he's targeting you. Shinobi?
Right.
What say you?
I definitely believe in manifest reality. We do exist. The question is there something moral about reality itself? Is there something moral about the universe? Is there an absolute moral out there? For instance, Plato would have said that numbers are not only an abstract, but there are actual numbers out there, that we only see the shadow of these numbers. But they are out there, probably outside our reality, but they exist. Numbers are physical things, they exist. And I think the question is, do I believe if morality is a real thing, that it exists in the universe, that we can perceive it or perceive a shadow of this actual physical thing called morality? And the answer to that is no. If you took away human beings tomorrow, if you snap your fingers and humanity ceased to exist, there will be no morality in the universe. It's a human construct. It's an abstraction.
I would say morality is the set of rules that binds us into cooperative groups. So I think it's pinned to us in kind of the same way that you do. Not specifically the same way, but very similar. Popog for $5 says evolution is a mathematical model, not just nucleo-based chemistry.
Well, that's true.
Are evolutionary computer algorithms not evolution?
The thing is with, he is right. I mean, it is mathematical. And a lot of the papers that you read on group selection, their points are made mathematically. It's all maths. And I'm not very good at that type of maths because it's probably probability and
got you.
But so comparing the maths doesn't work. But I've been told on good authority that the models actually match what the abstracts say. So yeah, it is mathematical, basically, evolution. I think Richard Dawkins would say that.
Caffeinated Friend for $5 says, unrelated, don't read this out loud. Excellent stream as usual. Have a coffee on me. So,
oh, excellent.
You got me anyway. Sal for $4.99 says, zebra's example works against you. One zebra running won't confuse a lion, but attract it. Only at the group level does a trait become beneficial. But do
you know how they discovered that the camouflage thing with zebras? Do you know how they?
Yeah, I heard from. Go ahead. I've heard it, but go ahead and.
Yeah, go on. Do your bit.
It's Robert Sapolsky, right?
I think, yeah, probably is actually.
So Robert Sapolsky in his book talks about how they were studying zebras. And they wanted to study them at the individual level, and so they decided they were going to go out. It was difficult to figure out which zebra was which, so they tagged with a bit of a splotch of red paint. And as soon as they tagged the zebra, it was like a death sentence, because then the lions could figure out, like, they could focus on one zebra.
X marks the spot.
Yeah, exactly. I guess when you're after a zebra, your goal is to like run him down, to exhaust him. It's the same way that humans hunted.
Yeah, which means you've got to pick
if you're constantly chasing a new zebra, then like you're constantly getting a new energy-filled zebra.
Well, they normally go for the lame, and I think it's not only the fact they're easier to catch, but that they're easier to identify.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that to it. But I always found that funny that they were marking these zebras, and they'd go back the next day and there's no zebra there.
Yeah.
But well, you're right. I mean, the thing is that this is, well, it's statistical. They're only giving themselves a slightly better chance of survival. That the predator will probably pick somebody else in the herd. Once they're an individual, all bets are off, aren't they? You know. So it's which better strategy to apply at whatever environment, I suppose.
So I think you have a better understanding of where I'm coming from with the evolution of religion. So you could, I'm sure, steel man my argument, even though you disagree with it, correct?
Yeah. I mean, you could make that argument, and it's not off the wall. Put it that way.
Yeah, it's a rational argument. I'm not saying God exists. God said
there's only a subtle difference between the two sides of the argument, isn't there? And
so the book that I brought up a couple times, Sal mentioned, that goes against group selection, is called Adapting Minds by David Buller. It's in the chat if you guys want to look at it. It's a really boring book, I'm going to tell you. The guy is not a great writer, but
I think, yeah, I mean, Pinker did an essay on
edge.org.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also Jerry Cohen has an article on his website, Why Evolutionary is True, which goes into some depth on this subject. So I'd recommend those two. And they're both easy reads. I mean, there's nothing technical in either.
The fascinating one about the edge.org article, everyone sends me that edge.org article, which I've read probably 100 times. So it's a fascinating article, and all of the heavy hitters, all of the big thinkers in this space are comment on that article. So I'm definitely in the David Sloan Wilson, E.O. Wilson, Jonathan Haidt camp. So
yeah,
obviously I'm an outsider. I'm just an enthusiast. I'm not doing the research.
The thing is, if you're going to make a case for the evolution of religion itself, you would have to go for group selection. You wouldn't be able to do it via the individual selection route. It wouldn't make any sense going that route. So I can see why Jordan Peterson, for instance, he's heavily into group selection, because it's the only way that his worldview makes any sense.
Jordan Peterson does not believe in group selection.
Doesn't he?
No. He mentioned it on the... Yeah, see, when you know these things, nothing gets past you when you listen to stuff. Yeah, it came up in the first Sam Harris podcast on Truth.
Oh,
Sam Harris tried to say, well, group selection doesn't exist. And he's like, I'm not taking a position on group selection.
He should do, because he should do. The thing is with that, I think,
I'm not sure group selection is necessary, and
it would certainly make it easier, wouldn't it?
Well, the group selection could have taken place in the past. You know about the whites of our eyes evolved for messaging between people. Correct?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay, so in chimpanzees and other primates, they don't have whites of their eyes. The whites of our eyes are a very specific adaptation that lets everyone in the group know where everyone else is looking, which is the key. And I really encourage people to read the Joseph Hendrick book, The Secret of Our Success, because he goes through a lot of this stuff, and he's done a lot of legitimate research on the topic. But he's the go-to guy on cultural evolution. Have you read that book, Shinobi?
No, I should do, shouldn't I? Because
you should check it out. It's pretty fascinating, and he goes through some of the numbers. So yeah, humans are designed as group cooperators, which is just, I mean, it's a huge survival advantage. The zebras are definitely operating at the individual level, and there is some group stuff going on in herding, and you keep coming to herding, but I'm like, we've taken herding to the next step. I mean, a human herd is something akin to a military where you post guy.
Yeah, I think the key component of social groups like the primates is cooperation, and cooperation would have an evolutionary advantage. There's no doubt about that.
One of the experiments that Joseph Hendrick does, there's a chart in his book that's just fascinating, where they test other primates, I think orangutans, chimpanzees, and something else, against humans. And social learning is where we just destroy them. They do not learn from each other. They are not evolved cooperators. That's the Rubicon for human beings.
Well, I disagree with that. They do learn. They have cultures. Chimpanzees, bonobos, they have quite advanced cultures, and the only way you can acquire a culture is by learning. And one of the main mechanisms is copying. That's very important, not to be sniffed at, because that's the initial way that you learn anything, really, is copy. So I would disagree with that. Chimpanzees have cultures, bonobos have cultures that they acquire by learning.
I'm not saying that they don't have culture. I'm saying that they don't have the level of cooperation that we have.
Well, no, they haven't.
Which is an important distinction.
Yeah. Our communication skills are quite advanced. I think that's the one thing that separates us from any sort of higher order mammal, is our ability to communicate and therefore cooperate more effectively.
So Sal Sal for $5 says this things this discussion is missing: development and niche construction, both game changers when you look at them carefully. You want to talk about development and niche construction?
Development and construction. The interesting thing about human beings is when you look at the separation of the races, for instance, which is a touchy subject. I'm going to mention this. But there are
racist just for bringing it up,
Yeah. But the reason why the human beings are not more racially defined is the fact that we take our own environment with us. As soon as you start building huts and dwellings, and you start changing the environment about you, you're taking yourself out of that selection process. So that the reason why humans are not more diverse racially is the fact that we've taken our own environment with us. When we go to South America or North America, or we go to Asia, we've actually taken our environment with us. We've built the shelters, we've created a fire. You see what I mean?
Yeah. The social environment is the environment.
Yeah. I mean, you will have genetic drift between naturally between the different populations. That's going to occur naturally. But the surprising thing about humans is they're not more diverse, given the amount of time that these groups have been separated.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this topic is that I think even if you disagree with the argument that religion evolved and eventually became an adaptation that helped us cooperate, I think it's interesting in the realm of YouTube and the atheist versus theist debates. I think there's a lot of evidence that's coming out with the pro-social benefits of religion that I think a lot of theists are picking up on. I saw a debate recently between I think it's Inspiring Philosophy as a YouTuber and Matt Dillahunty.
That's a great channel.
Inspiring. Did you see the debate that they had? Oh, he's like
no. I caught the one he did with Jordan Peterson.
He's Dillahunty and Peterson. Yeah, that's interesting as well. But I think this debate, because he's a Christian and they're arguing the point of the pro-social benefits of religion, and the Christian brings a bunch of evidence, a bunch of studies that have been done, and Matt Dillahunty, the atheist, brings nothing, no evidence whatsoever for his position. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the controversy in the first round of debates between the theists and the atheists was over creationism, over religion, or over evolution, right? And now, in order for them to win these debates, they must embrace evolution, because it's evolution that brings them this nice evidence that religion is a pro-social.
I can understand why they'd have that approach, but the thing is that they'd be wrong. And
no, you're saying they're wrong again. Well, but if
now you're going to ask me for the evidence, aren't you? It's not them.
If they are accepting evolution, though, isn't that a win on the last round?
Well, no, that's a good thing. And,
yeah, it's a good thing.
If they have to think about it, and they've got to couch their arguments in that sort of language and learn about evolution, it's brilliant. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And to be perfectly honest, like I said, it's not an unreasonable thesis. That there's nothing irrational about taking that position. I might disagree with it, but I can understand why the argument would be made, and like yourself, the reasons you would take that position. Because it's not a simple open and closed case, is it?
Yeah.
We have to be careful when we challenge these ideas. I think the consensus is in biology that group selection is not actually that strong a case, but there might come a time when it is. The problem that I have with that is the fact that although even if they're right, and it is an evolved trait, doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. We have a lot of evolved traits that we tend to suppress. So whether something is naturally evolved or not doesn't imply that it's a good trait to carry forward.
Why do we suppress those? Why do we suppress those traits?
Well, one of the evolved traits is aggression.
And why do we suppress it?
Well, it doesn't fit well with a highly social group.
Now, how do we oppress it? How do we repress it?
Well, it's as an evolved trait, it depends on the environment. For instance, if you have an environment which is violent or dangerous, then that trait will be expressed. If you have an environment where the individual feels safe, secure, it's expressed less often, but the trait is still there, but we suppress it because it's not ideally suited to socializing and cooperation.
Socializing and cooperation. How do we suppress it though? What is the mechanism of suppression?
Well, that's a good idea.
I'm following this up because you're making my argument here.
It would be suppressed because it's not triggered. It'd have to be triggered. There would be something in the environment that would trigger that aggression.
Yeah, the social environment.
Well, for instance, if you're hungry and somebody takes food away from you unjustly, then that would trigger the response in the individual, wouldn't it?
Chris Bohm talks about this in his book Hierarchy. I believe it's called Hierarchy in the Forest, but it's the reverse dominance hierarchy. It's us being able to cooperate to suppress the aggressions of alpha males. So we bring them in line culturally.
Right.
So it seems it seems that you do understand portions of my argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, it's not an unreasonable argument, but where we differ is the evolutionary side of it. And that then, once you go further and further away from the fundamentals, one side gets less strong and the other side gets stronger. I think my side it has more explanatory power rather than the group selection side.
Sal for $5 says niche constructions importance starts long before huts or agriculture. Most organisms do it. We always have. Are you? I feel like she's talking about us forming our environment the same way that you're saying. Like we're constructing our evolutionary niche in the same way that ants.
Yeah, well, any organism that's replicating will change its environment around it, and like you said, it's even sort of further down the chain. Ants are changing their environment. They are constructing, aren't they? Termites construct pretty magnificent. Totally. These things are like cathedrals, aren't they? In the
beavers the same way.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a good point. And I've got to be honest. You look at a honeycomb. That's a marvelous construction, isn't it?
Well, you're switching organisms because it's what a beaver does is very different than what I just think the hiving, like I'm very conscious of which different types of groups we're talking about. This is why I kept making the distinction when you kept bringing up herding. I'm like, no, we're talking about hiving. And I think it's very easy for people who aren't paying attention just to say a group is a group is a group, but it's not. It's really not. You can't say an angry mob is the same as a functioning military.
No, that's true. And there are differences between insects and
beavers. Yeah,
beavers. I mean, I can accept that. I mean, they are operating on different. I think the principles are different in each case, isn't it?
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. So yes, that's a valid point, isn't it? But these behaviors are not necessarily complex. But when you the end product can be complex, can't it? I mean, a beaver can dam an entire bloody river given enough time, which is quite impressive, really, isn't it? And they are creating their own environment.
Yeah. It's super interesting stuff. I think it's much more interesting than the does God exist debates. So that's why
does God exist? Yeah, but yeah, the one thing I say about that is religion as utility. If you think back to medieval Europe,
okay, so you believe religion has utility. So a lot of it,
well,
some
yes, it can have utility. Yeah, I wouldn't argue against that. People need comfort and certainty. Religion offers them that. Doesn't necessarily make it right, but you can see why people would turn religion in certain circumstances, and in those circumstances, it probably does perform a function. Some people don't need it, some people need it, but because it performs that function, because it has that utility, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea. Because I think generally there are certain modes of thinking, of interpreting the world, which leads us further away from truth, and there's certain modes of thinking that gets us closer to the truth. And I think truth is the important issue, not necessarily whether God exists or not. And that subject is entirely separate from whether religions are a good idea or not, because they're two different domains, aren't they? Whether the deity exists and whether religions are a good idea, because religions are most definitely a human construction, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. So, but have you read Haidt? Haidt talks about moral foundations theory, where we're all operating off of intuitive ethics. Peterson talks about the hierarchy of value, which is a concept that he took from Jung.
Jung. That's the Peterson's got a thing about him, isn't he?
Yeah, but the concept that you're talking about, I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily know the specifics of their hierarchy of value. You obviously seem to place truth at the top of your hierarchy of value. Truth is the most important thing to you, correct?
Yeah, I think it's the one thing that would increase anyone's chances of survival.
Well, I take the survival aspect out of it. You as a person are more, you think truth inherently has more good than, say, well, there are other values. I mean,
yeah, even unpalatable truths are preferable to comforting delusion, basically.
Security is a value. So you would put truth above security.
Well, you could talk about Maslow's needs hierarchy.
Well, that's a different thing, because that's a needs, and we're talking about values.
Right, values.
Like truth is not on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think it's not on there.
So why has he left truth off then? I thought that would be up there somewhere.
Well, he has self-actualization at the top, but I don't.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
You would have to talk to him. Like, I would make the argument that you're saying truth is part of your self-actualization. I don't think everybody would say that, and a lot of people have different ideas about what truth really is. But I think it's interesting, because what I see on the anti-theist side of the argument is that. And just the whole idea of the hierarchy of value is it's deciding between two very difficult things. And I think a lot of times truth and truth and security come at the expense of one another. Like you can gain in truth and lose in security, or gain in security and lose in truth. And I think the religious debate kind of revolves around that to some extent. Like, you'll have Matt Dillahunty, who's basically just a career atheist, who will come out and say, his highest value is truth and his highest value is human flourishing. But the question is, which one of those is more important? If you have to sacrifice one, which do you sacrifice? And he would say, well, you can have both, but that's not the question. The question is, which is more important in Sophie's choice.
The dilemma is, if you had to choose between the two, you had no choice. Would he go for truth or would he go for flourishing?
Right.
You'd have to go for flourishing, wouldn't you?
Well, then I'm saying, okay, well then religion, that's the perfect trade-off, because religion produces human flourishing at the expense of truth.
Yes, but that's not, I mean, you could say that, and it's not necessarily generally true, though, is it? That religion...
Well, it's true in certain circumstances. I mean, I'll grant you that there are religions that are just toxic to... If we're talking about Islam, which is, we even have said it, it's basically an honor culture. I think part of the reason why Christianity is working to facilitate cooperation in the West now is because it's become a dignity culture. So I think there is something to be said. I mean, Christianity can have the label Christianity and be an honor culture and be bad. I think it was an honor culture 300 years ago, like during the Crusades and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is with medieval Christianity, which is a good example to use actually, because the cathedrals, Lincoln Cathedral, for instance, springs to mind. At that time, people would have been living in absolute abject poverty that we couldn't imagine, and yet they constructed this building project, sucked the wealth out of the surrounding area.
You mean it created jobs?
Well, yes, it created a lot of jobs. It created stonemasons and carpenters and what have you. I mean, there was that aspect if you're the capitalist type. But what I'm saying is that it was a very expensive project, particularly given the circumstances that those people lived in. And no doubt it would have had a detrimental effect on many hundreds of people.
So we'll finish up here. This is, I think, this is one of the things that I think is the most devastating argument for the anti-theist side, that religion is just a useless byproduct that we don't need. The fact that religion is here and widespread, I think, in evolutionary terms, we think of any behavior that is ubiquitous, have serving some kind of evolutionary advantage, correct?
Yes, the key term here is ubiquitous, isn't it? It's common in all cultures.
It is, yeah. It has different variations, obviously, but I think we would probably agree that it all goes back to that hyperactive detection module.
Absolutely. We can agree on the basic. It is an evolved trait. The only point that we diverge, the only disagreement we have, is the mechanism that allows that to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of moot if we're both in agreement on the behavior it's facilitating.
Yeah, and I'm quite happy to say that religion does have certain benefits, and I quite like a lot of religious people. I mean, I like Christians. It's fine. We get on. Oh, except for the Jehovah's Witnesses are not my door on Sunday morning. I'm trying to dissuade them. I'm trying to put them off. So,
just get a sign that says no Jehovah's Witnesses.
I've actually engaged them, and they're fine, but I think they're getting fed up with me now. So
yeah. So do you want to say anything before I end the stream? We've been talking for about an hour and a half. I thank you for coming on. You've been very generous with your time, and we.
Right. Okay, well that's just whizzed by, didn't it? Yeah, I've got a lot of things to think about. And
we can do this again. We can, if you want to do this again and bring evidence to the table. I think one of the interesting things is there's so much interesting evidence out there that nobody's really talking about.
Yeah. I'll have a think about what you said, and I'll do a bit more research. Like I said, that the last time I delved into this was 2012 when they had their Dawkins Wilson sort of spat, didn't they? So that was the last time I seriously looked at the issue. So I'd like to go revisit it and find out what the state of the game is at the moment. But it's an interesting topic. I'll give you that.
So let's do it. We'll to be continued at some future date. Thank you so much.
We shall have a part 2 in a couple of weeks. How's that?
Yeah, totally. And if you want to bring in a ringer, if you have someone that that knows the topic better, we can add people to the discussion. I'm totally in favor of that.
Yeah,
So
sounds good. What we need is a philosopher and a biologist, really, isn't it?
David Sloan Wilson owes me a live stream, so I just haven't taken him up on it because I have this channel has been shadow banned. It took me a lot to figure out what was going on, but so I'm just working out my channel stuff. And
how did you find out it was shadow banned then?
Well, just not to talk too much about shop, but I have a second channel that I wasn't doing much with, and it's like I could just upload some clip there and it would get like 500,000 views. And I thought, why am I able to just to upload some random clip on this channel and it gets 500,000 views, and anything I upload on my friended channel just gets nothing, like nothing ever gets in the algorithm. So I just started experimenting around uploading videos on this channel that were tagged the same as videos on that channel. And I can upload something to Friended and it doesn't get recommended, and it doesn't get into people's searches. So if I upload the same video to my Think Club channel and I upload it to Friended and I do searches, the one video. Yeah, if you're, especially like I did Social Justice Detective thinking, a lot of people search social justice, a lot of people, that'll be in a lot of searches, but and I think it goes back to, I did a video when I first started my channel called Slut Shaming is Awesome, and I think somebody was triggered by that video and did some kind of suppression thing with my account. So I am trying to get the Friended channel. I went through and deleted all my demonetized videos, and I deleted that video, and I think I might do a channel name change to see if I can get it out to reverse it, just because I'm curious. I could, for all intents and purposes, this is a dead channel as far as I'm concerned. But if I can reverse it, I think that information would be useful for other people, because I think other people, I can't imagine if I had 100,000 subscribers on this account and I couldn't, none of my videos would get in the algorithm, because that's a huge investment.
It's really not fair, is it? Because you put so much work into your video, and
it's totally unfair.
And the thing is, it is time-consuming process, and if you're going to start deleting things, and that's not fair, is it?
It isn't fair. But I think we both, like, whoever promised you fair, right?
Well, yeah, that's true, actually, isn't it? So,
well, let's leave it there. Thanks again for the super chats, and all in the stream. You stay on the stream, and I'll say a quick goodbye to you.
Okay,
Shinobi. Great. But again, subscribe to Shinobi's got a bunch of really great videos. I think he did one recently on Cheddar Man.
Oh, Cheddar Man, yeah.
Which is really popular. It's a great video. You should check it out. So take care, everyone.